From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Westin. Welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. On the brief today from Capitol Hill, Kevin Cirilli on another day of impeachment hearings behind closed doors, Jenny Leonard in Washington on hopes for a Phase 1 trade deal with China, and Greg Farrell on President Trump losing an appeal over his tax returns. So, Kevin, let's start with you. News breaking just as I took my seat here today. We have at least two transcripts out from the Schiff investigation.
Exactly. Just moments ago, David, a red headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal as the House Intelligence Committee releasing two transcripts from those closed-door hearings over the past couple of weeks regarding the impeachment inquiry. The first transcript is with the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, and the former senior advisor to the Secretary of State, Michael McKinley. Now, in public statements, what Democrats are saying on the House Intelligence Committee is that this is only going to further their calls to continue with their impeachment inquiry. Just in a public statement led by House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff, he says, quote, "As we move towards this new public phase of the impeachment inquiry, the American public will begin to see for themselves the evidence that the committees have collected." They go on to say in this public statement that the transcript of interviews with Ambassadors Yovanovitch and McKinley demonstrate clearly how President Trump approved the removal of a highly respected and effective diplomat based on public falsehoods and smears against against Ambassador Yovanovitch's character. So again, just moments ago, we're getting this transcript as these details begin to trickle out. And just anecdotally, I can tell you that there's been some problems logging on to see the transcript, clearly potentially just an illustration of how much interest there is to read these.
Yeah, and presumably they're the first of several that are going to be coming out here, I suppose, as they go through and maybe redact because of national security issues. At the same time, they were supposed to have some more interviews, some depositions up there behind closed doors today and this week. Are those going forward? Because Ms. Yovanovitch, as well as Mr. McKinley, were actually willing to participate. Some people are not.
Exactly, and we don't know whether or not John Bolton, the former national security advisor, will go through with the testimony that was scheduled for this week behind closed doors. And we're hearing from sources on Capitol Hill that those public hearings could begin as early as the next couple of weeks, as Speaker Pelosi told you as well in that awesome interview. Okay, thank you so much to Kevin Cirilli reporting from Capitol Hill. Now we're going to go to Jenny Leonard, who is in Washington as well. She's on trade, and we heard from Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross over last night that, in fact, things are going forward on Phase 1. What does that mean?
Yeah, David, the latest wrinkle that we've heard in the past couple hours is that Chinese officials are actually looking at locations in the U.S. that Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, would be willing to sign a deal for. That is significant because Chinese officials had initially hoped that any signing would be connected to a state visit and a real celebratory, visit by him in Washington. And Washington, as we know, has become really a city of China hawks. So the fact that he's willing to come and sign it in another location, for example, Iowa, as the president has floated as one of the options, is significant here.
Yeah, so Mr. Ross actually talked to our colleague Hasina Amin and suggested really we probably are going forward with Phase 1. At the same time, he said Phase 2 may require some legislation, he said, over in China. Is that really reducing our expectations of anything soon happening on Phase 2?
Well, if you look back to our reporting maybe a week or two ago, we heard from Chinese officials that they're very skeptical that anything might come after the first phase is concluded. And that's mainly because they really expect the president to roll back all of the existing tariffs, and that's on, $360 billion. And we've heard from the White House that that's really not on the table at this point. So anything that would go beyond agriculture purchases and maybe some commitments on intellectual property that the Chinese are going forward with anyway, regardless of this U.S.-China deal, would require a really big give on the U.S. side. And that's the big question here, if the president's willing to go there. Okay, Jenny, thank you so much. That's our colleague Jenny Leonard reporting from Washington. And now I'm going to turn to Greg Farrell right here in New York, because we had an announcement this morning, actually, of the Court of Appeals coming out with a ruling on those subpoenas for tax records.
That's right. A victory for the Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance. somewhat predictable because the district court had also ruled in his favor. It does not mean that the president's going to have to turn over 8 years of tax records. It's quite likely now that it's been kicked back to the federal judge. It will go to the Supreme Court. So Trump is losing in these hearings, but he is succeeding in extending the time process.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's important exactly what's being sought here. They're not actually asking the president to do anything at all. They're going to his accountants, saying, please turn it over. And part of what the Court of Appeals in a 3-0 ruling said is, wait a second, we're not asking the president to do anything. Yeah. It's a third party turning something over. That's a pretty narrow basis for the Supreme Court to take a different point of view.
Yes. And their argument was also the president has claimed that the disclosure or turning these over would be detrimental to him. And the appellate judges said, well, the last 6 presidents have actually voluntarily shared their own tax returns. So there's no reason to believe this claim that the president's making that this will harm him in some way.
Yeah, but as you say, the president's lawyer said, next up, the Supremes.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
they're petitioning the court. Okay, thanks so much to Greg Farrell reporting here in New York. And now let's get a check on how the markets are reacting to some of what's going on today. Joining us now is Abigail Doolittle. So I'm going to guess, trade maybe a little?
Trade is certainly a headline here. A big risk on day, record highs for the major averages. The Dow finally joining the S&P 500. We also have bonds lower. So again, a risk on tone. But relative to trade, I think that it has more to do with earnings because the phase 1, I think that's already baked in. Phase 2, as you and Jenny Leonard were just talking about, that's more of a wild card. I think if a headline were to cross that those tariffs that are expected to be implemented on December 15th, if those were lifted, then if we saw a rally, I think you could squarely say that's trade. But I think that some of the trade news is mainly baked in at this point.
So what are the earnings that are driving it to the upside? Because we have some downsides, like McDonald's is down, Under Armour is down, I think, quite a bit.
Plunging.
So what's really pulling it up?
You know, I think it's the overall tone that we've been talking about. Some investors, traders had been expecting some sort of a disastrous September quarter earnings season, and it hasn't turned out that way. In fact, we have a pretty solid earnings season. We have a recap of it, in fact, that shows that the bulk of the S&P 500 companies have, in fact, reported at this point. They have beaten both top and bottom line. Top not by a huge amount, but look at the sales growth there for on a year-over-year basis of about 3%. That's pretty impressive. So I think the fact that we haven't had any disasters and it looks like there's signs that we could come out of an earnings recession, investors like that.
So it's better than was expected, as you say.
Definitely better than expected.
But we're well into it at this point. I think 70% of the companies, 90% by market cap.
Yes.
So we're going to be about to be through that. What do we need next to keep this going?
Maybe that December 15th tariff, if that were to be lifted, I think that could really be a driver because that would be a macro tailwind that's, again, not baked in at this point, a bit of a wild card. But that could certainly stoke traders, in a significant way. But right now, the mood, the animal spirits are stoked, and it seems as though investors are all in.
Yeah, right up there at a record. Okay, thank you so much to Abigail. That's great to have you. Abigail Doolittle. We turn now to Mark Crumpton for Bloomberg First Word News.
David, Nigel Farage says his Brexit party will run candidates nationwide in the UK general election set for December 12th. This could take votes from Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Party. Conservative Cabinet Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg warned that Farage's position, quote, risks us losing Brexit altogether. The 5-week election campaign kicks off in earnest this week. Saudi Arabia is offering a number of incentives to make sure Aramco's IPO is a success. The kingdom cut taxes on the oil giant for a third time. It may boost dividends again. It also will reward investors for holding on to shares longer. Shares will be listed on the Riyadh exchange. Aramco reported 9-month profit fell 18%. Sales were hurt by lower oil prices. Iran says it has doubled the number of advanced centrifuges it operates, increasing its capacity to enrich uranium. The country continues to back away from commitments under its nuclear deal with world powers in an effort to counter American sanctions. The U.S. withdrew from the agreement in May of 2018. McDonald's has fired CEO Steve Easterbrook for having a consensual relationship with an employee. The relationship violated the burger chain's policy. Easterbrook had revived sales at McDonald's with all-day breakfast. He'll be replaced by the company's head of U.S. operations, Chris Kamczynski. Meanwhile, the head of people operations at McDonald's, David Fairhurst, has just resigned as well. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts. in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks so much, Mark. Coming up, Commerce Secretary Ross says we're close to signing a Phase 1 trade deal with China. We ask Myron Brilliant from the Chamber of Commerce just how close we really are. That's coming up next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Westin. Wilbur Ross, U.S. Secretary of Commerce, is in Asia for meetings that have included Premier Li Keqiang. And he told our colleague Haslinda Amin that we're getting close to signing a China Phase 1 deal.
I think we're in good shape. We're making good progress. And there's no natural reason why it couldn't be. But whether it will slip a little bit, who knows? It's always possible.
Welcome now, Myron Brilliant. He's Executive Vice President and Head of International Affairs at the United States Chamber of Commerce. Myron, great to have you here as always. Okay, so if there is a Phase 1 deal, which seems increasingly likely, that's the signals from both sides we're getting, what's it going to cover and what's it not going to cover?
So, David, I think it is likely. I think that there are issues that have been resolved in these negotiations around financial services, even the ag purchases. They still have to figure out how to work that through. Currency. These are areas where they've made great progress in just the last 10 days. There are still question marks about what the administration's going to do on tariff reductions. I think it goes beyond just suspending December 15th. I think they have to look at the $112 billion that went into effect September 1st, and that's a little bit of a trade-off because the other issue is, of course, the IP chapter. Not just dealing with what I call 20th century IP issues in enforcing, but also dealing with trade secrets and technology transfer. We don't know yet what's going to be in that IP chapter, and we do not yet know what the administration's willing to do on tariff relief.
So let's sort that out just a little bit. You're saying that you think the Chinese are maybe insisting on, and maybe the United States is willing to do some rollback of the September 1 tariffs, not just holding off on the December 15.
Well, David, I saw the Vice Premier Liu He before he saw President Trump during the negotiation period just 10 days ago. Clearly on the minds of the Chinese is some kind of rollback on tariffs. We, of course, want to see that because we think it would help our economy, help our farmers, help our manufacturers to get rid of some of these tariffs. On the same side of the coin, though, we need to expect more on the IP front. Dealing with tech transfers, dealing with trade secrets. This is a big area of concern for U.S. companies, big concern of the administration. I'm encouraged that clearly the Chinese are looking at a site for discussions with the president. That means that they're getting closer, but we hope that something can get done this month.
Do you expect something really substantial on intellectual property in this Phase 1? Because we've heard from the Chinese they have to change their legislation. There's all kinds of things they have to do. It's just too hard to get done.
I think they're going to make some improvements that we welcome, but not go as far as we want them to go. The bottom line is there's some other big issues like cross-data flows. How do we deal with data, which is so fundamental to companies today, not just in the tech and financial sectors, but in many other sectors. How are they going to deal with subsidy practices at the state and local provincial level? There's a lot that has to be done in a second phase. So this is a start. This is a movement in the right direction. This is a trade truce that we're talking about. But ultimately, we need a bigger deal, and I hope we get there. Now the question is when and how, but that's going to be dependent on first getting this first Phase 1 agreement done.
We're talking with Myron Brilliant of the United States Chamber of Commerce. Let's turn now to the USMCA, that successor to NAFTA. As you know, it's terribly important to U.S. business to a lot of people. We talked with Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, on Friday, who said that she is hopeful she can get it done. At the same time, she absolutely has to have some concessions on enforcement, and she needs her caucus behind her. This is what she said.
It's about having agreement on the trade agreement. It all springs from what is in the trade agreement. I have gone in the past to the floor with a minority of my members, but that's not what this is. This is about a policy that we are establishing that isn't, again, let's just to pass it, we'll pass something less than has true enforcement in it.
So, Myron, I asked that question thinking if she really wants USMCA, she might say, as long as I get a majority of the House, I don't need a majority of my caucus. She's saying no way. She wants what she wants on enforcement.
David, I have to think that we can get this deal done, not because of just because the business community wants it. I think the politics are aligning. The Speaker and the Democrats need a win. They need to take something back to their congressional districts. the administration clearly has made this a top legislative priority. I think the winds are coming together to get something done. There are some loose issues to be resolved. They're closer than they've ever been. Speaker has acknowledged this. Chairman Neal has acknowledged it. They're working on some outstanding issues around labor and enforceability. They're working around some other issues. But I think the two sides could get a deal done within a week or 10 days, which would set forward an implementation of a bill that would lead to a vote down the road. And we want to get it done before the end of the year. That's the bottom line.
Well, exactly. As a practical matter, they don't have that much time because there aren't that many legislative days left in the calendar given the holidays and things.
Absolutely.
And then you're into an election year and you've got primaries and caucuses and things like that. So do they have to get it done this year?
David, I think we have to work on the premise that they can get it done this year. I think the political will is there. There's endgame jockeying going on. I think the Speaker, Pelosi, has been very forward-looking, has worked closely with the administration, particularly Ambassador Lighthizer, who's had close consultations with Chairman Neal and the Working Party. I think they're close to a deal. There are some loose ends that have to get resolved around labor issues and enforceability. These are things that can get worked out. If the will is there, which I think it is, we'll get something done this year. I'm confident of that. And we're doing our work. I mean, we have fly-ins going on. We're doing TV ads in key states like Michigan. We're going to keep working this issue hard. And I think labor has a motivation, too. They've got a better deal if they get this USMCA passed because they're going to have labor and environmental issues addressed in it. They should be part of the discussion as well in terms of getting this across for a final vote.
We're talking with Myron Brilliant of the United States Chamber of Commerce. Lastly, let's turn to Brexit, because there are some issues about U.S.-UK trade agreements. We've heard that they're going to be a great trade agreement. President Trump now has said, he said recently that, in fact, he doubts that if they go forward with the deal that they have on the table for Brexit. This is what he said to the UK media.
Under certain aspects of the deal, you can't do it. You can't do it. You can't trade. Well, I mean, we can't make a trade deal with the UK, and we can be, because I think we can do many times the numbers that we're doing right now.
So, Myron, are your members of the United States Chamber of Commerce concerned about this issue, that with the Brexit there may not be a trade deal with the UK, because there's a lot of trade going back and forth between the UK and the U.S.?
David, what unites China, USMCA, and Brexit is uncertainty. And what do our members want? They want certainty. They want certainty in the China negotiations. They want certainty in getting USMCA done. And they want certainty on getting a Brexit done. I think we have said very clearly we support a U.S.-UK deal, which could address areas like services and digital trade. But that's got to come after the Brexit negotiations complete, and also after the United Kingdom and Europe reach their understanding on what is next on the trade front. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think we could get it done. We run the U.S.-UK Business Council. We're going to be advocates, but it's not going to be a short-term thing. This is going to take some time, and we're going to be lining up in support of it.
Myron, you make such a powerful point about certainty for U.S. business. We see it in things like capital investment, for example. CEOs pull back in capital investments when they don't know what the rules are going to be. Do you have any sense that the administration, starting with Donald Trump, the president, understands the importance of certainty? Because I would have to say, whatever you think about the first 3 years of President Trump's administration, there hasn't been a lot of certainty.
Well, look, the Patriots lost last night. Those who were betting on the New England Patriots didn't get certainty last night. There hasn't been certainty, and it's hurt us. I mean, I know consumer confidence remains pretty good. Unemployment is low. But business is not investing in the way it would be investing if we had more certainty on the trade front. So, again, we've got to get something done on China. I'm encouraged that we're going to probably get a phase one agreement soon. We've got to get something done on the USMCA. I think this year is ripe for getting a vote. And third, we've got to see clarity in Europe. We can't have fragmentation in Europe. We've got to have clear rules of the game.
And are the incentives shifting for President Trump? Because we are now 364 days away from an election. Does some of that certainty in election year maybe help him as a practical matter in his election?
Well, I think if I'm the President of the United States, and I don't pretend to speak for him, I would want certainty. I would want to bring some stability into the economy. I think we have good, decent numbers. We could have better numbers if we put these trade challenges behind us. We don't control what happens in London and in Brussels, but we do have some say in what happens in the U.S.-China relationship and, of course, what happens with USMCA. So let's see the politics align on USMCA. I think we can get there. Let's get a vote done this year, and let's hope that something positive and forward-looking on the U.S.-China front gets done. But even if an agreement is reached in the next 2 weeks, we still have work to do on a phase 2 agreement. We can't let either side off the hook because there are big issues still.
Right.
Cross-border data flows, subsidies, industrial policies, none of those are going to be really addressed in the phase 1 agreement.
Myron, great to have you here.
Thank
As
you.
always, that's Myron Brilliant. He's head of international affairs and executive vice president of the United States Chamber of Commerce. Still ahead, Under Armour is in the crosshairs today as the stock has fallen on news of possible accounting irregularities. It's our stock of the hour, next on Bloomberg Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Westin. It's time now for the stock of the hour. Under Armour is heading for its worst day in 2 years, plunging 17% after the company disclosed that federal officials have been probing its accounting practices. Kaylee Lyons is here with more. It's never good news when the feds are looking at your accounting.
It's never good news, and today it's enough to completely wipe out the stock's gains for the year. So this started over the weekend, the Wall Street Journal reporting that the feds were looking into the accounting practices. So the company then had to come out and say, yes, this is true, and it's been happening for 2 years. They first responded to document requests back in July 2017. The company says it's fully complying with the DOJ and SEC. It says it didn't do anything wrong, but essentially the focus of the probe is whether it inflated sales from quarter to quarter. So obviously that's not something you like to hear as an investor. The street pretty much fully admitting today this is going to create an overhang on the shares, at least for the near term, although the one exception, an analyst over at Stifel said to take today's plunge actually as a buying opportunity because at the end of the day, this isn't something that's going to affect investors directly. He says that the drop today is not about the fundamentals of the company. It's just that immediate fear on the disclosure of that probe.
Well, that is the question. What are the fundamentals of the company? And are we confident we know what they are if they're not accounting properly?
Well, yeah, good question. And I will say that the company didn't address any further this probe on the call. They made one mention of it, and then that was it. Now, as far as the fundamentals, the bottom line is still looking pretty good. They actually beat for the 6th quarter in a row. Revenue did fall slightly, but even though it fell, it did beat estimates. The only thing that is continuing to plague the company is that North America, their main market, domestic market, makes up about 70% of their business, is still just really sluggish. They're struggling to turn that around. And keep in mind, that story, along with this accounting probe, comes just about 2 months before they're going to have a CEO change. Kevin Plank is handing over the reins to the company's president in January, and this creates a lot of overhang on the stock going into that transition.
Yeah, it's a tough time for the incoming CEO.
It is. This is a very difficult time for all of this to be coming to light, and you're seeing that reflected in the share price today.
Okay, Kaylee, thank you so much. Great reporting on Under Armour. That's Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons. Up next, he famously said he wanted the House Oversight Committee to hold 7 investigative hearings a week for 40 weeks. But that was back when Barack Obama was president. How does former Congressman Darrell Issa feel about the House investigation of President Trump? We're going to ask him next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. From New York, this is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. I'm David Westin. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, House committees released the first 2 transcripts from closed-door depositions in impeachment hearings. Interviews with former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Marie Yovanovitch and former senior advisor to the Secretary of State Michael McKinley are now available to the public. Today, the committees are scheduled to hear testimony from 4 Trump administration witnesses. According to 2 people familiar with the matter, all 4 don't plan to appear. Meanwhile, President Trump suffered another setback in his effort to guard his financial information. A federal appeals court refused to block a subpoena for his tax records. That subpoena was issued by the Manhattan District Attorney. The ruling moves the Trump tax case one step closer to a showdown in the U.S. Supreme Court. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross says this month the U.S. may not need to put tariffs on European cars. He told Bloomberg the U.S. had good conversations with European car makers. This about their investment plans. Last month, the U.S. struck a deal with Japan. It averted the auto tariffs. The manufacturing slump in the Eurozone hasn't gotten any better. Last month, it remained near the weakest in 7 years. Factory jobs were cut at the fastest pace since the start of 2013. Employment fell the most in Germany. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks so much, Mark. Darrell Issa went from founding a successful business to serving 9 terms in Congress representing districts in and around San Diego. After stepping down in 2018, he's back in the race for Congress in 2020. And we welcome him now from San Diego. Mr. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, David.
Let me start with why. I mean, you stepped down just a reasonably short time ago. As I understand, you're running for a somewhat different district this time. Why are you back in the race?
Well, I'm lucky. About a third of this district was mine until redistricting a few years ago. But I feel a little bit like Howard Schultz when he left Starbucks. You know, you put a lot of years into Congress and you step away and suddenly everything goes to, you know what, in a handbasket. So that's part of it. The other part of it is I was looking forward to serving in the administration, but I was blocked by one senator, Senator Bob Menendez, refused to give me a hearing. And as a result, I never got confirmed into a trade position that I really thought I could have helped the administration with.
Your last race, the primary, was fairly tight before you stepped down. Are you expecting an easier time of it this time? Because as I understand, the demographics are a little bit different in the other district.
Well, they're non-existent comparatively. The last district I won by a small amount. Well, President Trump or Hillary Clinton got about an 8-point lead. So about 8 out of every 100 people voted for this conservative, having voted for Hillary Clinton. In this case, this is a Trump plus 15 district, so very different dynamics, even though it's only a few miles apart.
So most of us really remember you because of that government oversight committee that you ran for several years. And you were, I think it's fair to say, fairly energetic in your investigation of President Trump and the people, President Obama and the people in the Democratic administration. How do you feel about what Adam Schiff is doing right now?
Well, I came into Congress with Adam Schiff 19 years ago, and you might remember that the way he got to Congress is he beat Jim Rogan, complaining about Jim Rogan helping lead the impeachment of Bill Clinton. So there's more than a little irony that he thought when he was running 19 years ago that the impeachment of Bill Clinton was wrong, and now he thinks that anything they impeach this president for will be okay. So I'm a little disappointed because obviously there's no high crime or misdemeanor, but they're looking for one. And that's not the way impeachment's supposed to work. You're supposed to find the crime and then impeach the president. Adam and I are aware of the only impeachments that have ever happened, only removal of office, I should say, of any official under impeachment have been federal judges who wouldn't resign after their crimes. So it is a tool that shouldn't be used lightly, and unfortunately I think it's being weaponized for political purposes.
Congressman, you said it's obvious that there was no high crime and misdemeanor. Would you just explain that for a minute? I mean, apart from whether ultimately you think it's impeachable, isn't there at least an arguable case that if in fact the President of the United States went to a leader of a foreign country and said, please help me investigate one of my political opponents, isn't there at least a colorable case there that might be abuse of power?
You know, you have to look at it in the proper perspective. Asking for anyone and everyone not to be above the law is appropriate. Now, the fact that Hunter Biden was above the law when Joe Biden basically got his case dismissed without an investigation is an abuse of power. Saying you want to have it looked into to see, and working with the Department of Justice to see whether there was a crime, it may be politically a little insensitive sounding, but the reality is you want to stop corruption. If Hunter Biden was guilty of foreign corruption under the Foreign Corruption Policy Act, the fact is he should be held accountable. If he committed crimes there or crimes that would be illegal in the U.S., he should be held accountable. And that should be true of anyone. So as we go around the world trying to teach a government system that tries to avoid corruption and then punishes those who inevitably do try to profit in a corrupt way with kickbacks or bribes or any of the other things that happen in most countries, we need to be vigilant. Should it have been the president saying to his cabinet people, look, I want to fight corruption everywhere, including Ukraine, where it's obvious? Sure. But did he do anything wrong by saying that you wanted to have him work with the Attorney General's office to see if there was a crime committed? Not at all. That's well within his rights. He is the chief law enforcement officer of the country. You might think it was politically questionable, and David, just to give your viewers history, The first impeachment was of Andrew Johnson because he fired, they didn't like him, and he fired the Secretary of War, and they impeached and almost removed him. He absolutely had a right to fire the Secretary of War, but they treated it politically as an impeachable offense. So is it impeachable? Anything's impeachable. Did he commit a crime? Not at all.
Okay, we're talking with former Congressman and now candidate Darrell Issa out in San Diego. So, Congressman, I understand what you're saying. The president, if he wants to go after corruption, that doesn't sound like a bad thing. It would be nice if he did it generally rather than specifically. But why, if this was such a noble thing, did he need to threaten holding back on military aid that had been ordered by Congress, not just authorized, but ordered by Congress? Why didn't he need to threaten President Zelensky rather than just saying, you know what, there may be corruption, could you help me, please?
Well, first of all, members of the Senate, including Joe Biden, have historically withheld funds until they get what they want. It happens all the time. As a matter of fact, I've been in senators' offices trying to get them to release holds they have on various funds for various allies, whether it's Lebanon, Egypt, or a myriad of others that we support over the years. So that's not uncommon. But having said that, if you read the transcript, it wasn't a threat. If you look at the timeline, he wasn't even aware of any funds being held, and the funds were not, in fact, held past when they were asked for. So the facts in the case don't support the narrative that Adam Schiff is trying to put out. And I think that's an important thing is, you know, people are going to hear that the president is going to be on trial. But quite frankly, Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, AOC, they're going to be on trial with the American people of, are they in fact being just in what they're doing? Or did this begin with Adam Schiff reading something that didn't happen in order to create a national narrative that was false? And the answer is the latter.
Once again, we're talking with former Congressman Darrell Issa out in San Diego. So finally, sort of to wrap this up, if we could, Congressman,
Sure.
Why are they trying to put the whistleblower on trial? That's the one I don't understand. Because whatever the whistleblower's motives were, whatever his background was, actually what he pointed to did happen. We now have the transcript, and we know that. So why do we go back to that? And are you concerned about that as a former investigator, about what that could do as a chilling effect on future whistleblowers?
Well, first of all, whistleblowers to the federal government are not always anonymous. As a matter of fact, it is expected that a whistleblower comes forward. Often the whistleblower has been part of doing something wrong, and the whistleblower is given immunity in return for being publicly available. So the idea that a whistleblower is the same as a confidential source, maybe to the press, is very different. Just a week over the weekend, there was a 46-page expose on a company called Tyversa in the New Yorker. That work was the result of our committee and a whistleblower working for years to uncover a cyber fraud that was being committed against the government. That's one of the many, many hearings that we had over the years. The whistleblower was treated badly. In the case of Fast and Furious, the whistleblowers had to be protected by Congress for years from the Obama administration. So the idea that whistleblowers are secret and they're not that you can't cross-examine them is definitely not a tradition that I would support. I do support the fact that they should not be punished and there should be no damage to their careers as a result of their going forward, and I would join with anyone on that.
Okay, Congressman, really appreciate you being with us today. It was very helpful. That's Congressman Darrell Issa, former Republican congressman from California, who is now running again for Congress. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Westin. Less than a year to go until the election, and though we have a ways to go before we know who the Democratic candidate is, it's not too early to start thinking about the backdrop for the election and to consider what history teaches. Here to do just that for us is Kaylee Lines.
David, of course, in recent history, we know the stock market has performed pretty well under President Trump. But when you look at its performance in the past 3 years since the 2016 election relative to the performance after 2012 and 2008, the returns really have been about the same after President Trump's election and after both elections of President Obama. That's the stock market performance. And when we take a look at the economics as well, we know President Trump once said he would be the greatest jobs creator of all time. And to some extent, in certain sectors, that is true. You've seen gains across sectors, most notably particularly in agriculture, where the workforce has risen 9.8%, though you have seen some slight declines in the services and sales and office sectors of less than 1%. And of course, David, it's not just jobs or the economy that really matter going into the 2020 election. It also is the impeachment inquiry. And if we look at predicted odds, we see that the odds of the president getting impeached in his first term have now risen to 78%, while the odds of him not completing his first term are now, the odds of him completing his first term are much lower now, around 71%. And of course, what does that mean for 2020, David? Well, maybe the odds are just a little bit higher that a Democrat is going to take the White House in 2020. Predicted now puts the odds of a Democrat winning at 55%, of a Republican winning just 48%, David.
Okay, thanks so much. Terrific reporting from Kaylee Lyons. That's the backdrop to the 2020 election, but what Democratic policies might speak to the voters? On Friday, I asked House Speaker Nancy Pelosi whether Democrats could persuade Trump voters to switch despite a strong economy. This is what she said.
While you make some indications that the economy may be improving, and God willing it is, in the lives of American workers, they still feel a stagnation of their wages, a stagnation of their opportunity.
Welcome now our political panel of Jen Kearns. She's founder of Women for a Great America, and Jeannie Zaino of Iona College and senior advisor to applied economics. Always great to have the two of you here together. So what about that, Jen? I'll turn to you first as a Republican. Does she have a point that, okay, fine, overall the top line numbers are good, but if you go below the top lines, there are a lot of people who are not feeling it?
I think that was the one glaring error of her interview that I saw. I think Americans are feeling it. We saw last week the wages numbers coming along quite nicely, unemployment numbers coming along quite nicely. President Trump was able to add 128,000 jobs to the economy versus the 85,000 expected, 85,000 that were predicted. And look, that was despite an auto worker strike, a trade war with China, and an impeachment inquiry. So the guy's not doing badly. And look, when it comes to the American people, I do believe that they're feeling their wages have come up, their situation in life is better. And I thought the most laughable point she made was that Americans want less expensive health care. Well, she ought to check out Elizabeth Warren's price tab for Medicare for All and socialized medicine, because that is not cheap.
Well, I'm going to come back to Medicare for All because it is something she did talk about. But Jeannie, what about Jen's point? Because the fact is, it's not just the top line number. If you look at real wages, they have been growing, and in fact, if anything, disproportionately on lower income workers. So is it true that, in fact, people are feeling better?
You know, there is a certain segment. You can't deny that the economy has been growing. But I think what Nancy Pelosi was talking about, and it was a great interview, by the way, that you did with her on Friday, what she was talking about was the fact that it still is not getting down to Main Street. And you can look just, for example, at what this president has done with the tariff war and the impact it's had on his constituents, the farmers, you know, in the Midwest where he needs them most, right? So you could go down the list to people who are not feeling this good economy, and that's what she's been talking about. So Democrats have been talking about. And as you look at something, and I know we're going to talk about it later, like health care, you can talk simply about the cost of pharmaceuticals for people, which are astronomical and really, really makes it hard for people.
When she, of course, has a bill on that, and she talked about that, she thinks that's terribly important. But Jen, let's talk about it. Let's not do it later. Let's do it right now. Let's talk about health care a little bit, because I did ask her about Medicare for All, and that was a winning proposition for the Democrats. And this is what she said in part.
I'm not a big fan of Medicare for All. I mean, I welcome the debate. I think that we should have health care for all. I think that the Affordable Care Benefit is better than the Medicare benefit.
So I was interested, Jen, watching her and listening to her on that, whether she was speaking as a leader of the Democratic Party and talking to Elizabeth Warren about presidency, or she was speaking as Speaker of the House saying, wait a second, I've got a lot of House races, and I'm not sure they're going to do that well under Medicare for All.
That's right. And what Nancy Pelosi knows, and she is a very shrewd politician. I came up with California with her as the congresswoman out there. Boy, she is a tough one to beat. And she knows exactly where each of her congressional seats lie. And Medicare for All and socialized medicine does not play well. And what's what's telling here is that Nancy Pelosi might be too moderate for the modern day Democratic Party. You look at the folks running for president, there's definitely a divide between the people running for president and the people actually governing and doing the people's business.
Jeannie, give us an insight into the Democrats running. Is this because people like Elizabeth Warren really think this is good policy for the country, or do they think this is a bright and shiny object that will get me the nomination? If I just come up and say, you know, we're going to have health care for more, that doesn't sound so bold.
Well, Bernie Sanders has famously been saying this for a long, long time. So when you talk about Bernie Sanders, I don't think anybody could say this is just purely an electoral, way to attract liberals. I do think that Elizabeth Warren is committed to the idea. I happen to agree with Nancy Pelosi. It is neither a winning strategy, and let's not forget, Nancy Pelosi shepherded through the Affordable Care Act. She knows firsthand how difficult these changes are. And when she says people like their private health insurance, she's right. You aren't able to do a grand $52 trillion package in one fell swoop. And luckily, it's just not going to happen. And so she knows that.
And luckily, unlike the Affordable Care Act, which Nancy Pelosi said they had to pass before we could read it, now we're in a presidential cycle where millions of Americans are actually getting to read the plan before they elect somebody, which is why it's not faring too well.
We're talking with a political panel of Jeannie Zaino and Jen Kearns. So I want to come back to impeachment for a moment, because Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, with me at least, said politics is one thing, impeachment is another. The twain will not meet. They're separate things. But when it comes to impeachment,
she wishes.
But one of the things that we're seeing right now in the polling actually is there is something of a rise in the percentage of people, a little below 50%, but like 49% now, who say not only do I think he should be impeached, but I think he should be removed from office. That is a potential shift. Jeannie.
That is a potential shift. We've seen the increase, and we're seeing it from a wide variety of polls. We even saw it from the Fox News poll. You can see it, but, I think a really telling point on this are going to be the 3 upcoming Southern gubernatorial races that the president is active in. Because if those go his way, it is a sign that at least conservative states are not moving with the Democrats on this. But if the Democrats can hold one or more of those out, that is a very good sign for them that this is having an impact.
That's a really important point. Are you worried about that 49% number, Jen?
I was pretty shocked by it, I have to be honest. 49% support impeachment, 46% and 41% respectively on those 2 polls support impeachment and removal. And this is what I said from the beginning, that the White House should be taking this very seriously. There were a lot of people sort of dancing in the end zone the first week out, saying this is going to be great for the president. It's going to make him a sympathetic character. He's going to be able to fundraise off of it. And that is true. But I always cautioned this could also lead to his removal. So that removal number is something I'm concerned about. Here's the bright spot. The RNC did some internal polling last week. They said Democrats' support for impeachment is down 10 points. You also have to look at the state-by-state numbers, David. In the top 10 congressional districts that are up for grabs in 2020, the support for impeachment is about 10 points lower than that number nationally, so it's in the low 30s.
Jeannie, and as long as President Trump gets 85, 90% approval within Republicans, can he be removed?
He won't be removed from the Senate, but let's be clear, an impeachment of any president is not a positive for the president. I don't care how Republicans want to spend fundraising numbers, polls, or anything else. That is not something you want to be battling. By the way, if nothing else, it takes his eye off policy that has to be addressed in this term.
Exactly right. Okay, thanks so much to our great panel of Jeannie Zaino of Iona College and Jen Kearns, former spokeswoman of the California Republican Party. And this is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. I'm David Westin. Nancy Pelosi proudly took the gavel as the first woman Speaker of the House back in 2007. I asked her about the role of women in government leadership and what role diversity can play in making political as well as business decisions.
Well, I think that there's plenty of opportunity for not only a woman, but diversity in all aspects of our government. But I am excited to be the Speaker of the House in the Congress that will observe the 100th anniversary of women having the right to vote. And in the House, we have, for the first time, over 100 women members of the House. I'm proud to say 91 of them are Democrats, because we made a decision to increase the number every election. When I first went, there were 11 Republicans and 12 Democrats. We went from 12 to 91. They went from 11 to 15 because they They just have to make that decision, and hopefully they will, as we want more women on all sides of the aisle.
And you've been undeniably successful at that. At the same time, some of the challenges that I think we see in the House, we see in corporate America as well, where we bring women in at entry levels, but it's harder to get them up to the so-called C-suite. What experience do you have that might actually help corporate America? What do you need to do? Sometimes you have to go out of the system. You have to even break the system to make sure that they can get through that glass ceiling.
Well, I love to hear you saying that, because it is really important, because nothing is more wholesome, speaking from a political and government standpoint, than the increased participation of women and in the leadership of these organizations. And as far as corporate America, our military, the academic world, politics and government, nothing is more wholesome for the system than the increased leadership of women. And we truly believe that when women succeed, America succeeds. And so we want women to have the confidence that there's no secret sauce. They can do the job. So not be shy about that. And again, it would be thrilling to see many more women in the higher ranks of corporate America, on boards and all the rest, because it's not that women are better than men, it's the diversity of opinion. The beauty is in the mix of it all. And it will happen. I said the other day, pretty soon there's going to be a day that comes when people will say, how can we let more men to Congress?
That was part of my interview with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi back on Friday. Coming up here, Balance of Power continues on Bloomberg Radio. And in our second hour, we're going to talk with Tom Peters. He is the founder of UCampaign. This is a political social media app that allows people who are right of center to get together with other people who share their points of view without going through Facebook, without going through Twitter, without paying any money. It's a fascinating thing. It's been downloaded now 500,000 times so far. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.